Chapter 49 of My Story of the Civil War and the Underground Railroad by Marvin Benjamin Butler. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Quote, And the king shall answer any, say unto them, Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as ye did it unto one of these my brethren, even these least, ye did it unto me. Unquote. Anna, the Slave Girl, Chapter 49. At the age of 18, Anna was a very beautiful girl. She had handsome brown eyes, rich dark hair, and teeth resembling a double row of pearls, and through her veins coursed some of the best blood of Virginia. Mr. Brandon, Anna's master, lived near the little village of Camden, Virginia. He had inherited a large plantation, well stocked with Negroes, mules, and fast horses, and withal was a great sport and a very reckless man. He bet on elections, gambled with professionals, lost heavily at the races, and drank too freely. From 1850 to 52, he found himself so involved in debt that to save his credit and honor, he was compelled to sell some of his slaves. So Anna and 5 field hands were sold to the agent of Art Shrimp and Company of Mobile, Alabama, to fill up their stockyards. When the sale was completed, they were chained, together with a few others picked up in the neighborhood, and shipped like a drove of mules to Mobile. On the opposite side of the street from Mr. Brandon's, and some 40 rods nearer the village, lived the Honorable Marshall C. Van Camp, and on the next lot to the east lived Squire Mason. These 2 men were very intimate friends, and for years were partners in the real estate business. Messrs. Van Camp and Mason were Wesleyan Methodists from Puritan stock, and regarded the whole system of slavery as wicked and sinful. Anna had been a frequent caller at both of these homes, and highly respected and kindly treated by every member. The Van Camps had 1 daughter, an only child about Anna's age, and between the 2 a warm friendship sprang up in childhood and lasted until Irma Van Camp was stricken down with fever, and after a week of suffering, died in Anna's arms. The poor girl was then heartbroken and desolate, and as often as possible called on the bereaved parents, where she found relief and sympathy. And still another great sorrow followed. Her only friends, the Van Camps and Masons, sold their business and property and located in Mobile about 1 month before Anna was sold. Something like 6 weeks after reaching Mobile, Mr. Van Camp was passing through the slave pens of Shrimp and Company, and off in a dark corner, all alone, he saw a girl that resembled Anna. She was crying and sobbing and wringing her hands as if in utter despair. "Why, Anna, is it possible?" said the judge. "How came you here?" "Oh, Mr. Van Camp, God has surely sent you to me. I am almost dying from sorrow and despair, and my heart is breaking. I was sold to pay master's gambling debts and brought to this den by a slave trader and a chain gang." Then she dropped on her knees, before him while a fresh fountain of tears rained down her face, and cried out, "Oh, Mr. Van Camp, will you save me? Oh, can you buy me? I will serve you so faithfully, you and Mrs. Van Camp. You are so good and kind. I will work day and night for you as long as I live. I will pay you back in faithful service many times." "But Anna," said Mr. Van Camp, "you know I never owned a slave. I can't. It's all wrong." "Oh, you need not call me your slave," said Anna. "Buy me, and let me serve you until I've paid the last farthing of cost, and then I'll serve you as long as you live, if you will give me a home. I can never survive this shame and degradation. Since I came here, I have been sent to the whipping post twice, and each time was stripped of my clothing and given 30 lashes on my bare back by a brute because I couldn't eat and sing and dance and laugh with the others. The traitor says he will stop my crying or kill me. I can't stop. My heart would break if I'd stop." "Now, Anna," said Mr. Van Camp, "take courage. Don't cry any more. You're very sick now. I'll see what I can do and be back in an hour." The judge called at the office of Art Shrimpf and, in a friendly manner, said, "Art, what are you doing with Brandon's Anna? I just passed through your cattle pen and found her off by herself in a dark corner, crying herself to death." "I bought her thinking she was a choice piece of goods, but 'twas a mistake. She won't eat and cries all the time. I've had her whipped twice, severely, and it did no good. I hardly know what to do with her. Buy her, Judge. I'll give you a bargain. She's a fine cook." "I buy and own a slave, Art, and shut myself out of heaven." "I don't know much about heaven," said Art, "but I'd like to sell her before she gets there." "You'll sell her pretty soon, then, for she'll not live 48 hours in her present condition. She's burning up with fever now, and so weak she can hardly stand on her feet. What is your price?" "Well, Judge, you may have her for 12. "No, Art. She may not live with the best of care a week, and I'll have the expense of a casket and burial. I'll give 8, because I pity the girl, and possibly may be able to save her life." "Call it 9, Judge." "No, 8 is enough for a girl standing on the edge of the grave. Had she been a horse or even a dog, as sick as she is, you would have had all the doctors in the city to see her. I tell you, Art, she has cried and is in such despair now that her brain is burning up, and all that you have done for her was to give her 60 lashes and threaten to kill her if she didn't stop crying. If you say 8, I'll take her home, put her to bed, and send for our doctor at once. There's not a minute to lose." "Well, take her then, and good luck to you, Judge." When the bill of sale was made out and signed, and the check drawn up and signed, Van Camp went back through the slave pen, and finding Anna, he said kindly, "Come, Anna, you are our girl now. I have bought you. Come with me." He supported her to the door, and with help placed her in a cab. But Anna never knew how she got out of that dark room, and had no recollection of the ride to her new home on East Bay Street, where she was placed on a soft bed in a nice, large, well-ventilated room, The family physician was there and pronounced it a critical case of brain fever and prescribed absolute quiet. For many hours and days her delirium lasted. She imagined herself in the slave pen or at the whipping post, and would often get under the blankets to hide from the brute who gave her those 60 lashes. She'd often beg for Irma to come and get her. "I am dying here in this foul den," she would say. "Come and get me, Irma, and let me die in your arms as you did in mine." On the 8th day, the raving stopped, and she closed her eyes in natural sleep. When she awoke, Mother Van Camp was at her side. Their eyes met, and Anna returned her smile. There, Anna, don't try to talk. You have been very sick, but you are better now. Rest, dear child. You are at home. This is your home now, and shall be as long as you live. You are our girl, and we need you, so rest and sleep and live for us, dear child. We gave Irma back to God, and He has given you to us." A week later, the judge sat reading in Anna's room, and she was sitting in the big rocking chair, well bolstered up with pillows and cushions. Mother Van Camp came in, stood behind Anna's chair, stroked her hair a few minutes, and then sat down by her side. "Why those tears, Anna? You are certainly gaining very rapidly. Don't be discouraged. You'll soon be well." "Oh, yes, I know it, Auntie, but I was just thinking as you came in how good you had been to me and taken me out of that slave pen where I heard nothing but whipping, screaming, swearing, fiddling, and dancing, and how I thought then that God had forgotten and forsaken me, and all hope was dying, and despair was seizing my brain, when Mr. Van Camp came up to me so unexpectedly and spoke so kindly to me, just when I was sinking down lower and lower. He said, 'Come, Anna, come with me. You are our girl now.' And that was almost the last I knew until I came to myself in this room, in a nice clean bed with you watching over me, and for many days, I don't know how many, you and he had watched over me while my brain seemed to be a big ball of fire burning me up. Through all this, you have patiently and tenderly nursed me back to life, and now, Auntie, my heart is so full. Will you not let me shed a few tears, as I can express my gratitude in no other way?" During this brief recital, the judge closed his book, while occasionally a big tear rolled down his face. Aunt Van Camp took one of Anna's hands in hers, and with the other stroked her hair, and when Anna had ceased talking, said, "There, Anna, dear child, we understand how you feel, and we know all about how you suffered from your old master and mistress, and how you have suffered since they sold you. And we well remember, too, when our Irma was sick, how you sat up with her night after night, and then did your full work every day, for no one, not even I, her own mother, could handle her as tenderly as you. And then, too, we have not forgotten that our girl made us promise that should it ever be possible, that we must do for you as we would have done for her had she lived. In trying to keep this promise, Anna, God is blessing us in the same ratio that we are helping you." And then, as Aunt Van Camp kissed her tenderly, she continued, "There, dear child, we understand all you'd like to say, but now we are anxious to see a little more rich red blood come back in your face, and hear your old musical laugh, and hear you sing as you and Irma sang back in the old home. What we have done and are doing for you is a privilege, and you can reward us 1,000 times in love and affection. So brighten up, dear child, and throw off this burden. Oh, I will try, Auntie, to cheer up, but you and Master have treated me so kindly, so differently. Everything seems so new and strange, so different from the old life, that I felt burdened and overwhelmed with obligation, and felt that I ought to thank God and you with every breath.
Anna, said the judge, as he sat down by her side and took her hand in his, it's proper and our duty to always thank God for all our blessings, but now you must throw off this burden of obligation to us for our sakes and your sake, and live for God, yourself and us. We need you to fill the place made void by the loss of our dear girl. And now, Anna, let me tell you kindly this once. Please never call me master. We have but one master. He is mine and yours. Call me Marshal, or Mr. Van Camp, or Judge, or Uncle, or Father, whichever seems to express your regard for me the best. Then Anna slipped her arm around the judge's neck, planted a kiss upon his cheek, and said, while glad tears glistened in her eyes and in inexpressible joy illumined her pale face, "Oh, will you let me love you as your own daughter did, and be to you what she was, as I loved her so dearly? May I, and can I, take her place and call you father, and call Auntie Van Camp mother, and thus help to heal your sore hearts?" "Why, yes, dear child," they both responded, and in thus consenting, the hearts of these good old people were healed of a great sorrow, and the effect of this interview on Anna was truly magical, for in another week her laugh was heard ringing through the house, and the roses were coming back to her cheeks, and each day she seemed to grow more beautiful, graceful, and useful to these old people. The most frequent callers at the Van Camp home were Mr. Mason and Lady Mr. John Ward, who owned a foundry and machine shop only a few blocks away, and a Mr. Fairfield, an old acquaintance back in Virginia, born and raised in the same neighborhood with the Van Camps, Masons, and Anna. Mr. Fairfield traveled in disguise, but these people knew very well to what noble purpose he was devoting his life, energy, and fortune. Some 3 weeks after Anna's recovery, Mr. Van Camp presented her with a double locket with a gold chain, very rich and beautiful in design and finish, with his and Mrs. Van Camp's portraits in the case, and on the lid was nicely engraved, "Anna Elnora Van Camp," and on the other was engraved, "From Father and Mother Van Camp." In presenting this, he said, "Now, my daughter, you have a name of your own, and never use the name of Brandon, for it was not yours, and it has been disgraced." Anna impulsively threw her arms around his neck and placed a daughter's kiss upon his forehead, and while tears of gratitude started from her eyes, she replied, "Dear father, I will honor the name you have given me as long as I live. So help me God." Mrs. Stowe says in Uncle Tom's Cabin, quote, "There are in this world many noble fathers and mothers, when earthly hopes have been laid in the grave, with many tears,
the seed from which spring an affection so warm and so strong that it can only be satisfied when healing bleeding hearts and soothing the sorrows of the lowly, the friendless, and oppressed." Unquote. Of such were Mr. and Mrs. Van Camp, and of such is the kingdom of heaven. 4 years had passed, and Anna sat in her room with her head resting on her hand, thinking as she often did when alone, comparing the old life with the new. "Oh, what peace and happiness," she thought, "I have enjoyed in this home. If I could always have such a home, I'd like to live 1,000 years. Just 4 years ago today," she said, "since Father Van Camp took me out of that foul slave pen. Oh, is this new life real, or is it a dream? I'm afraid it's too good to last. How long can Father and Mother live? His health has failed in the last years. He is quite feeble." Then a thought flashed through her mind like an electric current. "Oh, if they should die, what then? What then?" This so startled her that she sprang to her feet and cried out aloud, "Oh, if they should die, God pity me!" Just as Mother Van Camp entered the door and caught her in her arms. "Why, Anna, what in the world has excited you so? You are trembling like a leaf. Do sit down and tell me what it means. If you should die?" "Oh, Mother, I was dreaming, though wide awake. I was thinking of the home you had given me, of your love and parental care, and how happy I had been for these 4 years, when a thought, not exactly a thought, 'twas more like a voice that said, 'If they should die, what then?' It so frightened me that I sprang to my feet and spoke out loud as you heard me. What does it mean, Mother? What can it mean?" "Dear Anna, you must quiet down and don't let this alarm you. Father has made everything secure for you. Don't think of auction blocks or slave pens. He has made your free papers. I saw and read them, and he has made other provisions for you. All his papers are in Squire Mason's hands to be held in trust. I'm not at liberty to tell you all, but he has made the same provisions for you that he would have made for Irma had she lived." "Oh, dear Mother, don't let me seem ungrateful to you. I have for some time been worrying about Father. He seems so feeble late. All I can ask or take is my freedom when I earn it. 100 years of my service would not pay you for what you've done for me. I was an orphan, a beggar. Yes, poorer than the poorest beggar. A slave, possessing no right to my body or soul, hopeless and helpless, when you snatched me out of the grave and brought me here and took me to your hearts, made me feel that I was your child, and gave me a home and more. You gave me love." "Yes, Emma, all that is true, but we know that you have already earned your freedom in relieving us of every care. So let your mind be at rest now, and we will drop this subject entirely." Anna was no longer harassed with the dread of auction sales and slave pens, and cheerfully attended to all her duties in the home, and rendered valuable assistance to Mr. Van Camp in the settlement of his business. Only a month later, on the 1st of August, Mother Van Camp was taken with malarial fever, and from the first there was such a complication of other troubles that the doctors gave no encouragement. And here, at the sickbed of one very dear to her, Anna devoted her best energy day and night until a noble life passed to its reward. "You have truly been an angel of mercy to us, Anna," said Mr. Van Camp, on returning from the burial. "How glad I am that God put it into my heart to bring you into our home. I can stay with you only a few days longer. I feel that my days are numbered, and I am anxious to go. I have made all arrangements for you, and you are to have a home as long as you like with our friends, Mr. and Mrs. Mason, when I am gone. And don't mourn for me, daughter, for I shall be better off there than here." "Oh, father, you must not. I cannot let you go," said Anna, as she placed her head on his shoulder and wept and sobbed like a child. "Dear child, you must not take on so. I only speak of this, that when my time for departure draws nigh, you may also be prepared. It may be many days yet, or but very few." "God grant that it may be many," said Anna. But it was only one short week, till Mr. Van Camp was stricken with a malignant type of fever and lived only a few days. Another sad opportunity for Anna to minister to one in his last sickness who had saved her from a cruel and terrible fate. After the burial, she locked the Van Camp house and went to her new home with Mr. and Mrs. Mason, who received her so cordially that it did much to heal a sore heart. The next day after the burial, Squire Mason took from his safe the large envelope containing the Van Camp papers, on which was written, quote, "A. J. Mason, Esquire, this package you will open immediately after my burial in the presence of John Ward and Anna Elnora Van Camp, and follow the instructions herein contained." That evening the three were in the squire's office, and the package was opened in the presence of all. The first paper taken out was a letter addressed to Anna, which she opened and read, while tears blinded her eyes. After looking it over, she read it aloud. Quote, "Dear child, few daughters ever gave so freely such unbounded affection and devotion as you have lavished on mother and me. Every day you fill our home and hearts with sunshine and joy. I am not able to reward you for such devotion. God alone can do that. I leave you with Mr. and Mrs. Mason. Should there be any trouble in the settlement of my estate, John Fairfield, whom you remember, will assist him and you. May God keep and bless you, my dear child. Farewell. Marshall Van Camp." The second paper in the package was instructions directed to Squire Mason and John Ward, to which was penned a certificate of deposit in a New York bank for $1,500 drawn to Squire Mason and John Ward as trustees. The instructions were brief and as follows. Quote, "I leave my child Anna in your care and under your protection. I have one near relative back in Virginia that would sell his lord for less than 30 pieces of silver. Beware of him. I have arranged with John Fairfield to aid you should you require an attorney. Deal with this child as you would by your own daughter, and God will reward you. Marshall Van Camp." unquote. In the third envelope was a check on the Planters Bank mobile for $1,500 with instructions as follows. Quote, "This check must be endorsed and drawn by Squire Mason and John Ward immediately after my burial. This is intended to be used in case proceedings are instituted to deprive Anna of her liberty or the property deeded to her. The residue, if any, shall be held by you in trust for her benefit until she is secure in her freedom." Unquote. The fourth paper was a warranty deed to Squire Mason and John Ward as trustees of this property of Anna E. Van Camp, conveying the home property and several other houses and lots on the same street. The deed provided that this real estate should be held by them in trust for 20 years or less at their option, and the net receipts over and above what might be necessary for her use should be deposited in a safe bank in a free state or in Canada. The fifth paper was a draft on a New York bank for $500 drawn to the trustees of the Wesleyan Methodist Church, to which he and his wife belonged back in Virginia. The sixth envelope was marked on the outside, quote, "Free papers for Anna E. Van Camp," unquote. Anna was the first to open the envelope, and as she glanced it over, she exclaimed, Oh, Father forgot to sign this paper." She handed it to Mason and Ward, and they looked it through and sat for a moment as if dazed. "Well," said Ward, "there's no question as to the intention. That can be proven by you and Fairfield and me." "But," said the squire, "will the court regard the intention?" "I fear not," remarked Ward. "We can't consult a lawyer here, for this omission must not be made known to any person in Mobile." "Fairfield?" said Ward. "Yes, Fairfield," said Mason. "I'll send him a telegram to be here on the 9 a.m. tomorrow." During this brief conversation, Anna sat as motionless as if carved from stone. "Anna," said Mr. Mason, "don't give up. God bless you, child. They can't have you, though it should take every dollar bequeathed to you to get your freedom." Fairfield, with his mulatto servant carrying a suitcase, arrived on the 9 a.m. train as expected, and immediately crossed over to Squire Mason's office, where he found all the parties interested. The papers were then taken up and carefully examined. "Well," said Mr. Fairfield, "there is only one serious trouble: the free papers. Should the court decide them void, then Anna is yet the property of the estate, and property can't hold property. But," continued Mr. Fairfield, "this real estate, which is very valuable, has been wisely conveyed to you as trustees for 20 years, or a less time, at your option. Can, in my opinion, be held by you if we succeed in helping Anna with her free papers beyond their reach for a few years. For I tell you now, that as sure as there is a just God in heaven, in less than 10 years, every slave will be free." "Amen," said Mr. Mason. "I believe and know it." "Now," said Mr. Fairfield, "if they commence proceedings to recover this property, including Anna, Shall we fight it, or shall I take Anna now immediately to Canada before she is attached?"
"Oh," said Anna, springing to her feet and her voice trembling with emotion. "What have I done to involve you, the only friends I have in the world, in such trouble as this? What have I done that I should be compelled to flee like a base, cowardly criminal, in the night or in disguise, from my home to some foreign land? Why, am I liable to arrest and imprisonment, as I am guilty of no crime except that I was born of a slave mother that was unfortunate in being white and beautiful? Must I, the daughter of one who was once a member of Congress and later of the U.S. Senate, and my own mother the child of one who was the governor of the great state of Virginia, must I be spirited away in the night like a thief from my home and the few friends I love as my life, because of my blood? People here and in Virginia talk of blood. Why, sirs, my mother's mother was the daughter of one who signed the Declaration of Independence, declaring all men free and equal before God, and afterwards gave his life to make this country free. I feel as though I'd rather fight than run. I know what is to be a slave, and I know how precious freedom is."
"Anna," said Mr. Fairfield, "I have known you from all you have said as to your blood is true, and like your ancestors, I see you have the nerve. But the safest way is always the best, and the safest way requires nerve. We'll see. You shall never go back into slavery again, so surely as God spares my life."
John Fairfield appeared here in two characters. On the streets and in the slave markets, he was a Texas planter wearing a broad-brimmed hat, a costume of homespun and vernacular peculiar to the district he represented. His disguise was so perfect in voice and costume that not one of his most intimate friends would suppose him to be the polished and cultured John Fairfield of Virginia. After dinner, Fairfield, disguised as a Texas planter, and his servant carrying a suitcase, called at the probate office, where he found a lawyer from his own county in Virginia. The lawyer asked to see the will of the late Marshal C. Van Camp. The clerk shook his head and replied that none had been filed.
"Has there been no action for the settlement of the estate?"
"Not any," replied the clerk. "He may have settled his own estate."
"Say, lawyer," said the planter, "I have a little claim against that estate and called to see the executor or administrator, but as there is none, I guess I'm up against it. Was there any property left, do you know?"
"Well," said the lawyer, "I find nothing here. I have heard that he had one girl said to be worth $2,000 and some very valuable real estate."
"Whoa, she must be very nice to be worth that."
"They say she's the prettiest and smartest girl in Mobile."
"Well," said the planter,
"I might buy her if for sale." "She'll be for sale. I shall get out an attachment as soon as I find out where she is. Probably tomorrow." Our planter had found out all he wanted to know, and looking at his watch, saw that it was 2:30.
"Come, Jack," said he, "I have an appointment at 3, and we must go. Bring the case, Jack."
They started off in an opposite direction,
and after quite a long tramp, came in to Squire Mason's through an alley seldom frequented. Mr. and Mrs. Mason and Anna were present. Mr. Fairfield took off his disguise and then said, "Come into the office, draw the curtain, and lock the doors. I have a scheme, and I know Anna has the nerve to play her part. A writ of attachment and search warrant will be gotten out and served tomorrow. This boy Jack of mine is not a boy but a girl, the same age of Anna, and as white and beautiful as she is, meaning no offense to you, Anna. I haven't time now to tell how or where or in what condition I found her. I have another suit of boys' clothing exactly the same that Jack has on. And you, Anna, will be Jack, and Jack will be Jim. Mrs. Mason will get a pair of shears and cut your hair, just as Jim's is cut, and Jim will dope you just as she is doped from head to foot. It will never wash off with water. When necessary, I will furnish you a chemical that will erase it entirely. What say you, Anna? What say you, Mr. and Mrs. Mason? It is the easiest and quickest way out, and also safe. I will then stay and defend the suit as to the real estate, or furnish a lawyer, while the officers are looking for Anna Brandon. Mr. Mason will now give you your free papers so that he need not tell an untruth when he says Anna took her free papers and left. What do you say, Anna?" "The judge might rule," said Anna, "that the omission of the signature was intentional, and overrule all evidence to prove the intention. I'll do it, Mr. Fairfield, and I've got the nerve to play my part. Yes, I'll play my part of this joke. Bring the shears, Mrs. Mason." A luxurious growth of rich brown hair soon lay on the table, and the process of shingling was nicely done. "Now, Jack, take Anna into a room and dope her from head to foot, and dress her in that suit like yours." Anna blushed and hesitated. "Jack," said Fairfield, "take Anna into her room and show her the scars on your back and shoulders." And while they were out, Mr. Fairfield continued, "I saw them the next night after it was done, and I never saw such a sight before. The overseer gave her 40 lashes, whipped her till she fainted and fell, then kicked her, and left her for dead. And she would have died, sure enough, had not a wench, a good old mother, carried her to an old cotton house and doctored her wounds till she could stand on her feet and walk. Then I got her away. This happened 3 months ago, and she has been with me ever since. As I take Anna and her to Canada, we will stop at Lexington, Kentucky, and get her mother, who is on a plantation 3 miles out. I shall have the good old mother that nursed Lizzie as soon as I get back from this trip. Now, Jack," said Fairfield as they came in, "your name hereafter will be Jim. Please remember, and your name, Anna, will be Jack, representing the same Jack that has been with me all over the city, the slave market, and hotels, carrying my suitcase, which, by the way, contains a bundle of banknotes and valuable papers. Be sure and keep it in your hands. And now you go with Jim to the back alley and learn how to walk." This practice was kept up for 2 days. On the next morning, early, a Texas planter with a boy servant, carrying a suitcase, called at the Planters' Hotel and inquired for Mr. Polk Graham. "He is in his room, sir," said the clerk.
will you take my card and say to him that a gentleman from Altoona, Texas, would like to see him a few minutes?"
The clerk bowed and disappeared, and on returning said, "The gentleman says he will be pleased to see you."
"Come, Jack," said the planter. "If the clerk will please show us the way, we'll go to his room."
On entering the room, he was received very cordially and introduced to his two daughters, aged respectively 18 and 20.
"Mr. Graham, I learn that you are the legal heir to the estate of the late Marshal C. Van Camp."
"Yes, sir. I have placed on file in the probate office evidence to that effect. Is there anything I can do for you?"
"Well, perhaps," said the planter. "I have a small claim which I ought to file, not large, only a couple of hundred. How do you find the estate?"
"Well, I find but little as yet. His cash has all been disposed of in some way, and his real estate, which is valuable, has all been deeded to two men to hold in trust for 20 years, for the benefit of one Anna Eleanor Van Camp. We are not able yet to find who she is or where she is, but we are quite satisfied that she is the Anna Brandon that he bought of Shrimp some 4 years ago."
"Well," said the planter, "if he bought her of Art Shrimp, he will identify her. He would if he'd sold her 20 years ago."
"No trouble there if we find her. We have issued a search warrant and a writ of attachment and will probably bring her in today."
"Now, Mr. Graham, my business in the city is to pick up a few, say 2 or 3, handsome girls, from 18 to 24. Have 2 now near here, and from what I can learn of this Anna Brandon, she's a daisy. Did you ever see her, Mr. Graham, and would you know her now?"
"Oh, yes, I saw her often at Brandon's, and am sure I'd know her now. She was a beauty then and proud as Lucifer." "Say, Paul," said the older daughter, "don't you sell her. I want her for a maid. You promised to get me one." "Well, Sade, I think she's a little Tony for you. She's been spoiled by uncle and aunt and has got too many heirs." "That's just the reason I want her. I'd like to take her down. I'd soon—"
"No use talking, Sate. I'm a seller. We've got niggers enough." "What do you call her worth?" asked the planter.
"She's worth 20, but I'll take 18 now."
"Well, Mr. Graham, if I can help you in any way to find her, I'll gladly do so."
"Thank you, Mr. Brown. Call again."
"Come, Jack, we must go now. Bring the case."
They went down through the bar room, out into the street, and made their way to Shrimp's office.
"Well, Art, how are you? Take a cigar or genuine Havana? How's your stock now? Show me through. I'm looking for a few fancy gals, 2 or 3.
Shrimp took him all through his rooms and yards, but none of his girls suited. They were too old or too young, too dark or too yellow. As they were going out, Shrimp said to Fairfield, "That's a fine boy you got there. Where'd you pick him up?"
"Over in Kentucky."
"What's your price?"
"Not for sale. I can send that boy to New Orleans, Austin, or Cuba, if necessary, on any kind of business, and he will do it as well as I can."
"A fine-looking fellow," said Shrimp. "Say, Brown, I expect to have a girl here by tomorrow, one I sold over 4 years ago to Van Camp. She's a beauty and for sale."
"I've heard of her, and when you get her in, notify me at once at the Allen house. Come, Jack, we'll go now."
They went directly to the hotel, got their dinners, then made their way to Mason's, and came in through the alley from another street. Fairfield took off his disguise, and they all went into Mason's private office, leaving Jim to receive or dismiss callers. "About an hour after you left," said Mason, "an officer called on me and read a search warrant and writ of attachment." "All right," I said. "You can search the premises and attach anything you find that don't belong to me." He went all through the barn and house and barn and outbuildings, garden and park, but of course found nothing. He then became quite mellow and inquired if I knew Anna Brandon, Van Camp's house servant. "No," I answered, "but I knew Anna Van Camp, who lived there several years. A mighty fine girl, too. She called them father and mother and nursed them through their last sickness. She was no servant, however. Her mother might have been a slave. Some time before Mr. Van Camp died, he made out free papers for her and placed them in my hands to hold for her in case of his death. Right soon after the burial, I handed Anna her papers and quite a purse, and she left. Then he asked if I knew where she went. I answered no, but she'll probably land up north somewhere, for she had a right smart sum of money and has had plenty of time. He had called on Ward before he came here." "Well done, Mason," said Fairfield. "We have played them an expensive joke, worth by their estimate $1,800. Suit will be brought against you and Ward to recover the real estate. I don't know what they expect to do, but I do know that the institution of slavery is a bubble, all hollow, and will burst in less than 10 years. A revolution is inevitable, and God rules. Slavery is doomed. Whom the gods wish to destroy, they first make mad." At this time, Mr. Ward came in, and Mr. Fairfield continued. "As I said, Mason, you and Ward will be made defendants to a suit to recover Anna's real estate. I have employed you, one of the best lawyers I know. A friend of mine, John Sherman, living in Ohio. Here is his card. Send him a telegram as soon as notice is served on you. I will be here if possible, but you know the harvest is plenty and laborers are few. Now, Jack, you and Jim pack all of your duds, good, but right quick. And when done, if you have anything in the old home, Mr. Mason and Ward will go across with you and open the door. The key must be left with Mason. Get what you will need that belongs to you, that's not bulky, and pack in these trunks. Then, Jack, mark them plainly. Chester, Markley, Covington, Kentucky, valuable. Get the dray, and both you boys hop on and go to the station and order them shipped by express on first train. Hurry up, for we shall go on the 10:40 tonight." While these details were being looked after by Jack and Jim, Mr. Fairfield, in his disguise, was visiting the hotels, and finally called on Mr. Graham. "Thought I'd drop in a few minutes and see if you'd found that gal." "No, we've not found her, and that's not the worst of it. We learned from that man Mason, one of the trustees, that my uncle made her out free papers, put them in his hands to hold until his death, and a day or so after the burial he handed them to her with a lot of money, and she skipped out. A clean 2,000 gone.
My uncle was a crank, and I question whether I get enough out of this estate to pay my expenses."
Well, said the planter, "I'm awful sorry about that gal. I was in hopes you'd found her by this time. Take a genuine Havana. She may be hid somewhere in this city, and if you find her, see that you get hold of the papers."
At 10:30 p.m., the bus was at the door. Anna had kept up bravely until the parting with Mr. and Mrs. Mason. Then the tears started from her eyes. Her lips moved, but she could not speak, but threw her arms around their necks and kissed them both, then shook hands with Mr. Ward and climbed into the bus. Mr. Fairfield had already procured tickets for himself and 2 servants, and at 10:40 they bid Mobile farewell and started for Lexington, Kentucky. Our travelers reached Lexington at 10 a.m. on Sunday and found rooms at a hotel well in the eastern portion of the city. Mr. Fairfield engaged a span of good drivers and a 2-seated closed cab for a 12 or 15-mile drive to start that evening at 5 o'clock. Aunt Polly, Lizzie's mother, was well known in her neighborhood by the colored people as a good nurse and doctor for children. Promptly at the hour, the cab was driven up to the door. Fairfield took the lines, Lizzie sat by his side, and Anna took the back seat. They drove west into the heart of the city, then south 2 miles, then east 4 miles, north 2 miles, then east 3/4 of a mile, and Lizzie stepped out of the cab and walked rapidly toward the slave quarters. When she got within 20 rods of Aunt Polly's cabin, she met a colored girl, handed her a silver dollar, and asked her to tell Aunt Polly to come out there. "But don't tell anybody else. Dey's a mighty sick child down to Massa Havens. Be spry." "Yes, I'll get her here in a jerk." As Aunt Polly approached, Lizzie could hardly control her voice, but managed to say, "Is you Aunt Polly sure?" "Yes, sir. I is Aunt Polly." "They's got a mighty sick baby down to Massa Havens. Come with me mighty fast, and you can ride there." Anna had changed to the front seat, and Lizzie and her mother got in the back seat. Then the team was driven on a good pace past the plantation to the next corner, then turned to the left, and on reaching the pike, started for the east part of the city. As soon as Lizzie was seated and the team started, she spoke in her natural voice. "Oh, Mother, don't you know your own Lizzie? I'm your girl dressed in boy's clothes on my way to Canada." Then she threw her arms around her mother's neck and asked her again, "Don't you know me, Mother? I'm your Lizzie that was sold. Do you know me now?" "Yes, Lizzie, I knows your voice. Bless the Lord, it is Lizzie. Yes, it is. Bless the Lord, oh my soul, bless the Lord. Oh, how my heart has ached to take you to my arms once more." The carriage rattled on over the gravel pike, back to the city, while Lizzie told in a brief way the story of her crucifixion. It was 10 o'clock p.m. when they reached their rooms, and Fairfield told Anna and Lizzie to take Aunt Polly to their room and dope her black from head to foot, cut and shingle her hair, and fit this wig. "We must have one wench in our gang," he said. "And Aunt Polly, remember you are a professional cook."
"That's what I am, massa."
"Well, girls, we leave here on the 1:30 a.m. train for Covington, so be lively."
Aunt Polly scarcely showed any African blood, and when the girls brought her into Fairfield's room, a dark brown with a wig and a wide red ribbon around her forehead, she bowed and said, "I is your cook, massa." He indulged in a hearty laugh, which was very unusual for him.
"Well done, girls," said he. "You have learned the art, and I think I'll keep you in the service."
Aunt Polly spoke to Lizzie and said, "I'll be glad when you get your own clothes on and that yellow off your face so I shall know you. I shouldn't know you now if it wasn't for your voice." "Well, mother, I shouldn't know you with your voice if I hadn't helped to put on the dope." At 1:20 the bus was at the door, and at 1:30 Mr. Fairfield, one wench, and 2 yellow boys got aboard, reached Covington safely, and crossed over to Cincinnati, and went directly to Mrs. Layman's, a Quakeress, where the party rested that day. They then took the midnight express and reached Richmond, Indiana, where they stopped with Mr. Martin, a Quaker. Here the girls were both sick and compelled to go to bed. They were worn out by loss of sleep and constant anxiety, and now Aunt Polly made herself useful as a nurse and doctor. She gave warm baths, mints, catnip, and many bitter herbs for a week. The treatment was so radical that the girls concluded they were cured. They began to get so noisy and unmanageable that Aunt Polly discharged them. From Richmond, Indiana, they were compelled to travel on the Underground Railroad. This was a slow and tedious mode of traveling, especially in the month of November, for persons so recently from the climate of Mobile. Before leaving Richmond, Fairfield secured a good supply of blankets and wraps, and on the evening of the 9th day from Mobile, Mr. Martin drove them to the next station. Then they passed through Winchester, Portland, Decatur, Fort Wayne, Kindleville, and reached our station in Salem Township in a blinding storm of sleet and snow at 4:00 a.m. on the 28th of November, 1855. Cold, tired, and hungry. Although we were not looking for company so early in the morning, and in such a storm, we got out as quickly as possible, built a roaring fire, cared for them, and in about an hour our callers sat down to a good hot breakfast. For an hour after breakfast, Mr. Fairfield gave us a brief description of his trip, the saving of Lizzie from a brutal cotton planter, the rescue of Anna, right in the open, and the abduction of Aunt Polly. He expected when he reached Richmond to take a train for Fort Wayne or Battle Creek, thinking he could outdistance pursuit. But when the girls became sick, he knew he must change to the Underground Railroad. The next morning, after reaching Richmond, he went to the station and met a detective looking for Aunt Polly. He handed Fairfield a handbill offering for her apprehension $350.
"Quite a large, fine-built woman, nearly white?" asked Fairfield.
"Yes, she was straight, neat, and handsome for her age."
"I believe," said Fairfield, "I saw her at Cincinnati at the station, and if it was she boarded a train. How did she get away? Did anyone see her escape?" No, she dropped out of sight all at once on Sunday night about 8:30.
Have you any trace or track of this woman, Polly?
Not a single track, replied the detective. She's a goner, and I shall quit when I watch a few more trains and go back to Cincinnati.
When our company got thoroughly warm and somewhat rested, they all went to bed and slept all day. The storm raged while they slept, and by night the roads were impassable. Not until the third night were we able to move them to the next station. Mr. Fairfield got very nervous and anxious to be going, but the girls and Aunt Polly enjoyed the delay. Anna gave us a full and complete history of her life as a slave, as the time would permit, often being prompted by Mr. Fairfield, who also gave his part of the drama. When Anna spoke of Mr. and Mrs. Van Camp and how they rescued her when she was dying with despair, of their goodness and kindness when she was not only an orphan, but hopeless and helpless, her voice trembled, and tears glistened in her eyes. As soon as she recovered from her brain fever, they employed a private teacher who came to the house daily, except Sundays, until Mrs. Van Camp was taken sick. As to Lizzie and Aunt Polly, their stories would be too long for this article. I will add, however, that Mr. Fairfield called on us the next October and gave us the judge's decision in the case of Graham versus Messrs. Mason and Ward. The court ruled that, as Anna held free papers from Mr. Van Camp, the deed to her was good. The execution of the free papers by Mr. Van Camp was sworn to by the two trustees, and Mr. Mason also testified that he handed the papers to Anna and that she had left the country. The question of their not being signed was not brought out in the trial. End of chapter 49. Chapter 50 of My Story of the Civil War and the Underground Railroad by Marvin Benjamin Butler. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Memorial Address delivered at Ontario by Lieutenant Butler. Chapter 50. As we stand at the base of a mountain range, how soon the mind becomes confused by the immensity before us. Not until we move away far enough so that the outlines are plainly visible does the mountain rise up in all its grandeur and sublimity. So also, as we move away from the war of the rebellion by lapse of time, confusion of actions and opinions, prejudices and hatreds and losses and sufferings are left with the past. And as blind partisan zeal gives place to a nobler patriotism, can we fully comprehend the mighty struggle for national life and see the clear, impressive outlines of national action. The war of the rebellion and the causes that produced it, the national action and the patriotic devotion that subdued it, have been woven into the history of the past. And these great historical truths will not change, though we be condemned by them and by our conscience, our country, and our God. Cost of the war in life and suffering and ruined homes and broken hearts and blasted hopes. impossibilities nailed to the cross, in public and private property destroyed, and the sudden check to productive labor and commerce is far beyond human comprehension. Why, the bare money cost at that time was estimated at $6,189,929.90. This amount, if in gold, will load 700 cars, if in silver, 11,200 cars, and make a train 65 miles long. If in silver dollars and placed one upon another, it will make a stack or column 8,881 miles high, 881 miles higher than the distance through this earth. If in $1 bills and placed end to end, will make a belt 683,862 miles, and will go around the earth 27 1/3 times. The first gun of the rebellion was fired by the Confederates, April 12, 1861. The last engagement fought near Barco Chico, Texas, May 10, 1865, and during these 4 years and 1 month, our armies were engaged in 5,574 battles, skirmishes, and sieges. If through ignorance, prejudice, early training, partisan zeal, cowardice, or any such cause, we failed in our duty to our country in its darkest hours of peril, let us now inhale the patriotic inspiration of this Memorial Day and shed tears of contrition for our sins against our government, and tears of sorrow for and with those who saved for us our country and our flag. If there are any here, and I hope there are none, who were allied to treasonable conspiracies, organizations, or circles, giving aid or encouragement, directly, indirectly, secretly, or openly to the enemies of our country, or who rejoiced at our calamities and the defeat of our armies, and wept only and most bitterly among the ashes, the debris, and blackened, crumbling ruins of the slaveholders' Confederacy, do not despair now. There is mercy for even such as you. The grand army of the Republic that saved for you your country is magnanimous and will forgive, and in forgiving will commend you to the surer mercies of God. The doctrine of state rights and Southern supremacy were most insidiously taught all over and through the Southern slave states for more than 60 years, culminating in the mightiest rebellion the world ever witnessed. For 4 long, dark, and bloody years, the harvest of death and devastation rolled on desolating homes and filling the land with woe and suffering. Happy indeed were the homes where the firesides were not sprinkled with the blood of the slain, and no martyrs' graves to be kept green by the tears of the widow and the orphan. For so long had we enjoyed peace that when the first Confederate gun was fired on Fort Sumter, the whole nation was paralyzed with the fear and dread of war. And not until the grand army of heroes responded to the call for men and more men did the nation arise like a half-awakened giant and stagger to the mighty conflict. At first, it was a battle for life, and a very grave question of national existence, for time to look around and utilize resources, to take breath and gather strength for the terrible conflict already on, time to get money to inspire national credit, to get supplies of clothing, tents, blankets, rations, horses, wagons, arms, ammunition, artillery, and drilled men to handle it, gunboats and efficient crews, a navy to blockade 2,000 miles of seacoast, and sufficiently efficient in character to command the respect of the civilized world. Time to organize and equip not only an army to fight the enemy, but to protect a front of 1,500 miles in extent with all the railroads, supply depots, and supply trains, and to secure hospitals and hospital stores for the sick and the wounded, and an army of efficient surgeons and nurses. Time, for more time to create, organize, discipline, and adjust an army with all the essentials and collaterals for war. Then, as this mad rush and turmoil in meeting emergencies, while the surging waves of war rolled on, alternating between success and humiliating defeat, up rose the grave and all-important question: what shall be done with slavery and the slaves? For months the question hung, and none could answer. There was no law, no precedent. But in due time the greatest, because the wisest of them all, Abraham Lincoln, spoke words that thrilled the loyal North and went ringing around the globe. Quote, "As the Lord God liveth, if you lay not down your arms, every slave shall be made free." Unquote. And from the front line of battle, begrimed with dust and smoke, the grand army shouted loud and long, quote, "As the Lord God liveth, every slave shall be made free." Unquote. And from all the camps of rendezvous, from all the boys late dressed in blue, "We're coming, Father Abraham, 500,000 strong." And all the people who loved their country and the old flag bowed their heads and responded in one grand chorus, "Amen." It would not be at all surprising if in the hurly-burly, unprecedented, and stupendous labor involved, requiring millions of money per day, with a treasury bankrupt, and the credit of the government nearly ruined by the uncertainty of the result, that some few irregularities crept in, and some mistakes were made during the war. The credit of the nation was seriously affected, and the uncertainty of the result augmented manyfold by the divided condition of the North. Treasonable conspiracies permeated every function of the government and the social fabric of the whole country. Demagogues were numerous and bold. They were loud and vindictive in pronouncing anathemas against the president, and eloquent as expounders of the law and Constitution. Everywhere their influence was felt, and did much to retard the successful prosecution of the war. I am aware that at the present time we have many experts in the new school of political economy who are confident that they could have managed the financial interests of the government much better than was done during those dark, trying, and uncertain times. But when we contemplate the magnitude of the rebellion so suddenly precipitated upon us, without preparation on our part to meet it, by an enemy equally brave, sanguine, and at first better skilled in arms, with efficient leaders, and all closely bound together by bitter prejudices and the mighty cords of conspiracy, I'm of the opinion that the more thoughtful and patriotic of our people will not indulge in criticisms, but rather thank Almighty God that the rebellion was overthrown and that organized treason did not destroy the nation and murder the hopes of mankind. Whatever may be the cause of the crisis, the Great Depression in business, the loss to labor, and unrest among the people, with the wild, mad, and fanatical demonstrations in the last few years, is to be deeply deplored. In these crucial times, when war seems to be fermenting all over the world, like the leaven in a measure of meal, every citizen should be a patriot and stand firmly for law and order. Let us hope, comrades, that our beloved country will never again be involved in war. Let us trust to the virtue and the intelligence of the people, and let us hope that that fear of heaven which expels all other fear, and that regard for duty that transcends all other regard, may influence public men and private citizens, and lead our country still onward in her happy career. In the past, we have many examples of patriotic devotion. Only one will I recall. During our late Civil War, all England looked on with a jealous eye. "Wait," said she, "until your armies are turned loose to prey upon your country, and your boasted republic will be transformed into a military despotism." But what was the result? Within 3 months after Lee's surrender, 1,000,000 veteran soldiers, many of whom had been for 4 years schooled in war, were turned loose, and all returned to their homes, each adjusting himself to some useful occupation and profession in civil life. The armies of the Union, their warfare over, crowded along all the busy avenues, and were found in all the places of industry and high renown. The hand that dropped the musket seized the plough. The good right arm that wielded the saber with such destructive force impelled the saw and plane. The swords of the leaders of charging hosts were hung against the wall, and many of the boys who carried the gun have filled the councils of the nation, and the voices of all have been for peace. And all this transformation, from the volunteer citizen soldier to the civilian, without jar or discord. This is an example of patriotism that astonished the civilized world. In these perilous times, on this solemn Decoration Day, over the graves of our fallen comrades, and under the old flag, let us pledge anew our sacred allegiance, and stand shoulder to shoulder with elbows at touch as we did from 61 to 65, by our country now as we did for our country then. And if ills there be, bear them patiently and heroically like men, until in God's good time the people shall gather together in their respective places, where all wrongs in our government should and can be righted at the polls. It is to honor the memory of our fallen comrades that we meet here today. We must strew their graves with flowers and mingle our tears with those who gave for country more than wealth. A husband, a father, a brother, a son. We meet to teach our children lessons of patriotism, the cost of the war of the rebellion, and that their fathers were engaged in a just and holy cause, that they were not adventurers following the fortunes of war of some king or prince to found an empire, but honest, earnest, faithful citizens who, though they loved their homes, their families and friends, loved their country more. Not soldiers from choice, but from a necessity that an earnest sense of duty impels. That they fought not to enslave, but to free, not to destroy, but to save, not as the conscripted serfs of a czar, but as sovereigns of their own free will, for the greatest good of the millions that shall follow. We meet to teach our children that treason is a high crime, a crime against God and man, that the doctrine of states' rights as taught by Calhoun and his Confederate successors is odious and treasonable, and that the right of a state to succeed at will never did, does not, and cannot exist, as a part of a government cannot be greater than the whole. We meet to teach our children that for them to be happy, prosperous, and useful, three things are absolutely essential: to honor God and keep His commandments, to love their country and respect its laws, to love, honor, and obey their parents. We meet that we may not forget our unknown dead, the 148,000, many of whom were worn out and exhausted by long, weary marches and successive battles, fell out of ranks, and their graves are scattered here and there along the Tennessee, the Mississippi, the Arkansas, the Chattahoochee, the Rappahannock, and the James, all along the sounds up from the Gulf on the Atlantic coast, and down among the bayous of Louisiana, and on the plains of Texas, in the deep waters of the ocean, and hidden among the deep, dark ravines of the Cumberlands and the Ozarks. Forgotten and alone. What of their unwritten history, and how shall the obligations of a generous republic be conferred? Those who died in the dreary hospital after weeks and months of suffering from burning fevers and painful wounds, these sufferings, fellow citizens, were for you. Forget it not. What of their unwritten history, and how shall the obligations of a patriotic people be conferred? And those who, in the storm of battle, mid cannons roar and muskets rattle, as the foe charged on with cheer and yell, like grass before the blade they fell. The solid lines of seething flame leaped through the clouds of drifting smoke, and filled the air with bursting shell and grape, and shot and murderous hail. On the battlefield of the dead, the dying, the wounded, the friend and the foe. No mother's gentle hand to soothe the pain, bind up their wounds, or stop the flowing blood. No wife or sister to wipe away the tears and receive the dying message. No costly casket, no burial robe, no funeral train, no tolling bell, no pastoral service, no sacred song. If any, 'twas but the cannon's roar and the song of shot and shell. No, nothing of all this, but all kindly, though hastily gathered together, and in their blood-stained garments given a soldier's burial. They died for you, fellow citizens, and how shall your obligations be conferred? 30,000 died in the prison pens, dens of infamy and foulest vaults of hell. Language cannot picture, neither can genius paint, the suffering and anguish endured, and the patriotic devotion of more than 100,000 of our comrades who fell into the hands of the enemy. But when death and disease was all around, and among them, when starvation with glaring eyes and long bony fingers pointed to the tomb, and scurvy and loathsome worms were devouring their flesh, and insanity and idiocy were threatening to shut out the memory of their doom, our heroic comrades refused to take the oath of allegiance to the Southern Confederacy, that they might be released from their torturing death. Starving and dying, they could not desert their country and their flag. Not among uncivilized nations do we find such heartless cruelty to prisoners of war, and never such patriotic devotion to country. Oh, who can ever know of the unwritten history of comrades of ours, who knew of their dark and anxious hours, their secret meditations, their silent tears at the midnight watch, and their aching, anxious hearts for victory, country, and home? Ah, he who tempers the storm to the shorn lamb has written it all, and as with tender eyes each suffering hero saw, he bowed his ear to hear their cry, and watched each comrade fall. And many, as they fell, we hope did see the lines in front give way, and just before the last expiring breath could hear the shouts of victory all along the line, and may perchance see the flag, the dear old flag, as it was raised above the rebel works and spread its ample folds before the breeze. As the cloud of battle rises and gives a better view, who are these begrimed with smoke, with headless, limbless trunks, bleeding, mangled, gashed, and torn? The dead, the dying, the wounded, the friend, and the foe. O pitying Lamb of God, have mercy and hear their dying groans and calls for help and save, for no other help is near. Monuments have been erected by a grateful republic to statesmen and generals of high rank, but those who stood on the line of death, the picket line, the skirmish line, and the front line of battle, and marched through heat and cold and dust and mud and rain and sleet and snow and hail, are lost and forgotten in history, and are only known in the great aggregate, quote, the Army of the Republic, unquote. Oh, if I could, I would build a monument for the brave boys who carried the gun, and would build it on an elevation that would overlook the whole United Republic. Its base should be broad and its foundation deep, its shaft of purest granite reaching to the very heavens, and then commencing at the base and passing upward, I would cut a niche for every officer, higher and higher on the shaft, as their services and sacrifices for their country should indicate. And then, at the very top, beyond the reach of human vision, where the angels ever sing, and near the pearly gates of the New Jerusalem, I would place the Union soldiers who wore the blue and carried the gun. And then around them, among them, high over and above them, I would place the loyal women of America. The reckless and unscrupulous charges of fraud against the old veterans by the unpatriotic cowards who would not have stood within 5 miles of a battle line for $5,000 per minute taxes one's charity and one's good nature to the utmost. Let it be distinctly understood that somebody must have met the enemy on more than 500 hotly contested battlefields. Somebody must have answered to roll call at Fort Sumter, Donaldson, Shiloh, Port Hudson, Vicksburg, Stone River, Perryville, Antietam, Gettysburg, Chickamauga, Lookout Mountain, Franklin, Atlanta, and with Sherman all the way to the sea, and with Grant with his, quote, on to Richmond, unquote, through all the battle of the Wilderness and Fredericksburg, and on to Appomattox, victory, and permanent peace. Someone fought these battles, endured the hardships, privations, and dangers, won the victories, and saved the nation. Were they adventurers, paupers, perjurers, robbers, and frauds? They stood for the Union, and like an iron wall against an enemy who would have destroyed it, until 60,000 lay dead on the battlefield, until more than 300,000 died from exhaustion, disease, and wounds, and 30,000 died in rebel prisons. It is but a waste of time to answer such villainous charges. Comrades, this is our day. Let our hearts be filled with gratitude to God that we are of those who survive. Our day of thanksgiving for the grand results so nobly won. Ours and our children's day to observe as the years roll on, that we may inhale the patriotic inspiration that fills the air on Memorial Day. Ours and our children's to keep constantly before the mind the cost of liberty, the price paid for the suppression of the rebellion and the preservation of a free and independent government. Ours to cement those fraternal feelings that exist among those who, for many weary months and years, endured the perils and fatigues, the weary marches and bivouacs of a soldier's life, who together have breasted the storms of shot and shell and shared the privations, sufferings, and hunger of the prison pen. And ours and our children's day to keep forever green the hallowed memory of the heroic dead who have fallen to save their country from disunion and disgrace. And then we know what happy firesides they left for the cheerless camp, with what pacific habits they dared the perils of the field. There is no mystery or madness or chivalry about them, all resolute, many bearing for country, conscience, and liberty's sake. And we know what all this ceremony means. Why, that all over our broad land on the 30th day of May of each and every year, a grateful nation stops to weep over patriots' graves, and freely shed her tears and strew their graves with flowers. Our heroic dead, in memory, they're living still. Those honest sons of toil, those who once were called the mudsills of the North. Why, they gathered patriotic inspiration as they gathered flowers among their native hills. They inhaled it as the evening zephyrs or the morning's gentle breeze. They believed in their government and in its most essential doctrine, quote, "United we stand, divided we fall," unquote. They loved their country, lived for it, and died for it, as they met the enemy on more than 500 hard-fought battlefields, with wavering results at first, 'tis true. They fought them hand to hand and pressed them backwards, foot by foot, until at last the rebel hosts lay down their arms and fell in line. Then, as from 4 million slaves, their shackles fell in broken links. Quote, "Freedom from her mountain height unfurled her standard to the air. She tore the azure robes of night and set the stars of glory there." Unquote. Saved, thank God, a nation's saved. Saved to the world and the millions yet unborn. The grandest and best government ever known to man. Quote, "Then cover with flowers the nation's dead. Let them bloom o'er their bosoms and wave o'er their heads. Let the beauty and fragrance of spring's richest bloom fill the air that we breathe o'er the dead soldier's tomb." Unquote. End of Chapter 50. Chapter 51 of My Story of the Civil War and the Underground Railroad by Marvin Benjamin Butler. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Marvin B. Butler, Chapter 51. Was born in Grand Isle, Vermont, February 15th, 1834. He was one of the 5 children of Daniel and Mary Butler. His father and 2 brothers, Jesse and Lauren, and their families came from Vermont and settled in Salem Township, Steuben County, Indiana, on the farm now owned by John B. Parcell, when the deceased was 4 years old. He acquired his education in the Salem and Orland schools and taught school for several years. Mr. Butler enlisted at Salem Center in August 1861 in Company A, 44th Indiana Volunteer Infantry, and was assigned to Crittenden's command and promoted to first lieutenant, and took part in the battles of Fort Donaldson, Perryville, Stone River, and many other skirmishes during the Buell Campaign. From exposure at Fort Donaldson, his health failed, and he was furloughed home, sick with typhoid fever, and remained until recovered when he returned to his regiment at Battle Creek, Tennessee, and suffered a relapse later of typhoid pneumonia and was nursed back to health by his brother Henry at the Spence Hospital in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, where he was honorably discharged from service May 2nd, 1863. Mr. Butler served the people of Steuben County faithfully and well for 8 years as recorder, 4 years as auditor, and a term in the legislature, and in all of his public life was courteous and conscientious in the discharge of his official duties. He was united in marriage at Angola, Indiana, March 24th, 1864, to Miss Harriet Fuller. To this union were born 3 sons, Albert, Benjamin, and Harry. Albert died in infancy, and Harry, January 3rd, 1899. His entire life, with the exception of a few years, was spent in Salem Township. His wife died at their home in Salem Center, January 2nd, 1901. Religiously, he was a Presbyterian, from early manhood a member of the North Salem Church, and his life has been a living example of the faith he professed. In his death, the son loses a loving, indulgent father, the community a sturdy pioneer, and an exemplary citizen, and the church a strong and faithful pillar. During the last 4 years of his life, he compiled a book entitled, quote, My Story of the Civil War and Underground Railroad, unquote, which is now being published. He had been in failing health for several months, and it was his wish to be taken to the Soldiers' Home Hospital at Marion, Indiana, for treatment, where he died June 17, 1914, aged 80 years, 4 months, and 2 days. He leaves to mourn his departure 1 sister, Mrs. Susan Bell, 1 son, 3 grandchildren, and a wide circle of relatives and friends. Funeral services were held at the M.E. Church in Salem Sunday, June 21st, 1914. Reverend John Humphreys of Angola, officiating, assisted by Reverend E.C. Mason of Huntington. The above obituary is copied from the Angola Republican of July 1st, 1914. The end. End of Chapter 51 and end of My Story of the Civil War and the Underground Railroad by Marvin Benjamin Butler.